Good afternoon, everybody. What I want to talk to you about today is what I think is the most important innovation in funding of companies since venture capital itself. I'm an angel investor, but I also do something called a syndicate. How many people have invested in a syndicate before? And has anybody run a syndicate for their startup? Okay. So we've done 90 of these syndicates. We started on a website called AngelList. And our first deal was a meditation app called Calm.com. Has anybody used Calm.com? Raise your hand if you have. Thank you. We put together 91 investors, and we invested $328,000 in this, I think, 3-person company. And they couldn't raise venture capital. They had met a lot of venture capitalists. They had gotten a lot of no's. The idea of investing in a meditation app 5 years ago was kind of laughable. And they were doing about 50K a year in revenue. And we invested on this $5 million note. Again, it was the first time we'd ever syndicated a company. And the average investment, as you can see here, the majority of people put in between $1,000 and $5,000. If you're an angel investor, the minimum on most deals is 25, 50K. And here you see a couple of very lucky people put in 10 to 25K, but nobody put above that number. And this is super important because these investors, 4 years later, woke up to Apple making Calm the app of the year, not the health app of the year, the app of the entire iOS ecosystem for the year. And at that same time, subscriptions came to the iOS ecosystem, and then something very important happened. People had a ton of anxiety because of Donald Trump, Mueller, and this existential crisis. I'm kidding, but I'm not. And it led to an amazing ramp up in revenue. And I'm particularly proud of this investment. I've made 200 investments, or over 200 investments. 7 of them are unicorns. So it's a pretty good hit rate. But this one has got a very special place in my heart because I don't believe they would have, and they told me that they wouldn't have been able to raise money, and I think it would have been a slower trajectory. I think they still would have succeeded. And there's probably more good news to come from this company. They recently publicly announced that they're doing $100 million in revenue. So you can do the math on what it takes to become a unicorn or to be worth $250 million last year. It's an enormous outcome for that group of investors. And that group of investors wouldn't have been able to source the deal. I sourced the deal because the founder came on my podcast, and I got to spend an hour with him, and I really started to have some signaling. Anytime I see a founder who can get a domain name like Calm.com, which is $1 million domain name, I immediately want to take that meeting. So if you want to get a meeting with me, just get a world-class $1 million domain name. It's pretty much guaranteed. And so I kept pulling this string to see where syndicates would go. And I was an angel investor. I started my angel investing career at Sequoia Capital. They started a program called Scouts. Roelof Botha, the founder in YouTube and Instagram, who's a friend of mine, asked me to be the first scout. I did about $700,000 in investments. 3 of the first 7 turned into unicorns. But then my friend Naval at AngelList showed me his plan to create syndicates, and he really deserves the bulk of the credit for this. He took this SPV, special purpose vehicle idea, where you pop up one deal, and he built a platform around it. And here you can see the first 84 deals we did for $30 million, and this is just over the last 4 years. You see the last 50 or 40 or so, they got a little bigger. We'll talk about that in a moment. And there's some pretty great companies in here, including Density, which Andrew from Density pitched at one of our events, the Launch Festival. I met him. He was in Syracuse or Albany or somewhere upstate in New York. And I sat him down and I said, listen, this is going to be a big company. You should leave and you should come play in the NBA, because right now you're a founder playing in the YMCA, but you have NBA potential. And that was back in 2014. Since that time, Cyan from Founders Fund and obviously Mark Suster from Upfront invested. And that's what this syndicate thing has done. All the VCs are moving downstream. They want to do Series A's that are the size of Series B's, $5–10 million minimum. And they're typically $40–50 million post-money valuations. What that's done is it's left a huge swath available for people who are willing to write $250,000 to $500,000 checks. There are seed funds that have emerged. Homebrew, First Round obviously was a pioneer in this place. Cowboy Ventures, Aileen Lee, Kapor Capital. There's a bunch of people who are in this little cohort, but as you can see, we've done a pretty consistent amount of deals, but last year I decided, let me see if I can push this a little bit harder. And the more interesting thing is the average deal size. So you see in these last, this year and last year, the deal size went up dramatically. And that's a function of two things. One, we left AngelList, nothing wrong with AngelList, but they were taking 25% of the carry, and we were getting 75%. We decided we'd build our own team. So I have a 12-person team now that manages all of the content we do, as well as the syndicate. And it gave us more control, and we were able to pop up essentially a light version of AngelList with just off-the-shelf, no developers, using like a SurveyMonkey type form and some email automation. And that gave us a lot more control, and we moved it to jasonsyndicate.com for the last 40 or so deals. But this major milestone happened last year, and this was something that was part of the Startups Act. It used to be a limit of 99 investors per deal. Now it's a limit of 250 per deal with a cap of $10 million. And so this is one of probably 3 important milestones, the first of which has dropped. And when this happened, we saw our deal size more than double. And so now you're starting to look at deal sizes that look a lot more like a seed fund or a Series A fund, co-leading a Series A maybe in the old days. The performance here is kind of hard to see, but these all operate as independent funds. So they have deal-by-deal carry. It's not one group of funds. And this was a big drawback to the syndicate movement, which was you have no management fees. You just have carry, which means nobody has the money to build a team. We built a team off of the revenue from our podcast, This Week in Startups, and our events. But really, syndicates needed to be a little bit more professionalized. It was missing some very important pieces that venture firms do very well. So I took and studied what I saw at Sequoia Capital and other venture firms, and I brought it down to this level and built out this infrastructure. I've never really shared any of this data before, but I have some reasons for sharing it now. And if you look at the amount we've invested, it's over $30 million. And the top 5 holdings now are just about 2x that. And with the book value, obviously none of this is audited. That's one of the problems here in this space. It's kind of a new space, but everybody's investing such small amounts of capital that it's revolutionized risk-taking. If you were an angel investor, and most angel investors who are high net worth individuals that I meet want to put $500,000 to work. If they want to put $500,000 to work, let's say, they might make 10 investments of $50K each, because that's kind of the minimum. They might ask to make 10K investments, but not be allowed to, because founders don't want to go through that paperwork. And downstream investors certainly don't want to deal with a cap table with that many people. Syndicates let people make a very small bet, a feeler bet if you're in the poker business, just a way to see where you're at, right? You see the flop, there's an ace, you don't have one, there's 2 other players, hey, put out $800 and see if nobody else has an ace and maybe you take down the pot. That's what these early bets are like. You put in 5K, 10K, well, you take that same angel investor who wanted to put $500,000 to work. Now they can put their first $100,000 into maybe 25 companies at 4K each, like the Calm.com investors did, and then whichever ones perform the best, that you've built a great relationship with Density or Calm.com, maybe you could double or triple down on those, or put 100K into each of them. And just over the last year and a half or so, we've started to see $1 million deals. You can see CafeX, that's a robotic coffee company. They literally make a robot in that format. There's 3 of them now in San Francisco. And this is another crazy idea that I know didn't pass the venture community's screening. It's just too crazy. But when you have 90 people put in $9,300 each, many hands makes for light work. Chamath from Social Capital, Khosla Ventures, and now David Sachs, who I believe spoke this morning. David Sachs and I did the last round, and he joined the board. So again, What I've heard over and over again from the venture community is, Jason, we're not interested in doing these size deals. Come to us when you get to $1 million to $4 million in revenue with your startups. And as one very prominent venture capitalist said, I can't help you in the seed area, but I will overpay you later, which I thought was pretty telling. Everybody's got big funds. Nobody wants to do the hard work here. We've recommitted ourselves to really focusing on this area. Blockable, Mitch and Freda Kapoor and I are on the board of that company. They're doing housing in factories that's modular, and it's really going to help certain areas that have been hit hard by fires, as well as low-income housing. So I'm particularly proud of that. And again, it was one of those crazy ideas that I don't think would have passed the venture community. It certainly would pass the Kapors because they're adventurous venture capitalists like the venture capital community used to be. They're a lot less adventurous now. They want sure bets. LeadIQ was a very significant deal for us. This was a female founder I met who came to my accelerator. She had 1 employee, and then all of a sudden she hit $100,000 a month in revenue. And I said to her, she was going to go out on the road and raise money. And I had remembered the story of WhatsApp and Sequoia funding that company all the way through. And I said, what if we gave you $1 million now and you didn't have to do a fundraising announcement and your cap table would be super clean because our board meetings are me and you and your co-founder. She said, okay, we put $1 million into that one. So that's our first inside deal. And then most recently, we had our first $2 million deal. And again, that was another investment in CafeX with Kraft. So some best practices that we've learned. We do an investor onboarding. We don't have to do this, we choose to do it. And we send people a copy of my book. We send them different interviews I've done with prominent investors. Here you can see Ed Roman, Satya, who I think is here, Cyan. And we actually do an onboarding call with them. When we ask people, when we share a deal with people, we always have skin in the game. So I'm always putting $25,000 up to $500,000 from myself and my fund before I invite anybody into this syndicate. We run a webinar. We give the founders contact information. So when Andrew did his 2 syndicates, he had his mobile phone number in there. And we don't let people set it and forget it. We don't allow them to say, hey, Jason, can you just put 10K or 5K into everyone? We make them read the deal memo, go to the webinar. We want them to learn signaling and to be professional investors. And then this wonderful thing happens. When we give the money to Andrew over at Density or to Calm or to CafeX, they now have 250 investors, 150, 300, on one email address, a secret email address that only they can email. And when they need to hire somebody, instead of going to their board or their firm, they email up to 300 investors and say, I need an introduction at Disney, and they get back 8. Again, many hands makes for light work, and that's why this is becoming so powerful. It's not just that the VCs have moved downstream. It's not just that there's so many more startups and they're less capital intensive. It's that this is a better model for everybody, the founder and for the investors who can take less risk. When this came out, people said it would have no place in Silicon Valley. They said it would not work. And they're saying that now about equity crowdfunding, platforms like Seed Invest and Republic. They're saying they're not going to work, and that's going to turn out to be wrong as well. We tend to look for people in our Goldilocks zone, not too hot, not too cold, pre-Series A, but post-traction. So they have $10,000 to $1 million a month in revenue, but typically more like $250. You can see some of those there. Obviously, we do these webinars. These have worked out really well. The next leak in this game that we found was that there was no governance. And this has been a really big challenge for our industry. People coming out of certain accelerators that say you should look at the investors as kind of the enemy, as the adversary, and try to negate their power and control them and minimize their ability to mess up your startup. It turns out governance is kind of cool, and it makes the company run better. Shockingly, teams that make plans execute on those plans better than teams that do not. So we started a board meeting training program. We have 5 startups come in a day, and we have 5 board meetings back to back, and we just work with them on basically being a grown-up startup. Because in the previous days, you'd have a party round, 20 angels, but nobody's in charge. And then when the company dies, the founder goes, well, I called everybody, nobody cared, right? And if everybody's putting in 5K to 50K checks, that is a real risk. So we like to mitigate against that. We also do something very simple. We track every single monthly update, and we made it part of our side letter. You're required to send us a monthly update 10 times a year. And if you don't, it's not like we're going to sue a founder and take him to court over this, but we can say, hey, you missed 2. Want to come over and have lunch? Let's talk about what's going on. Because in my experience, with the exception of Uber, every company that didn't send updates was on the road to dying. We do due diligence. So now we've added a $2,000 fee to each of these deals. Since the deals are averaging $700,000, we said, well, we know the downstream investors. Mark Susser is going to ask Andrew to do diligence. Well, why don't we do diligence now? Because Andrew, we didn't do diligence. I just looked you in the eyes and said, you're a fucking winner. Let's go win. And I was like, yeah. Now we actually do diligence. We get all the bank statements. We get all the performance. We find things like, oh, they said they had Google as a customer and there's no contract. Oops. Or the founders don't have a vesting schedule. We know that when the VCs look at that, they're going to have a problem with it. Oh, there's a co-founder who owns 25% of the company and they worked on the company for 2 months. We have to clean that stuff up. So we're really starting to act and take this work very seriously. We also insist that they have 18 months of runway. Sometimes we'll do 12 months. We don't want our investors catching a knife. You know, we have a lot of our own companies and other companies coming to us for a bridge. We don't do that. We tell them, if you can get to 12 months, we're going to participate. If you can't, we're not going to participate. So what's our goal? Well, we have 2,900 syndicate members now. We had about 1,200 when we were on AngelList. We left AngelList. I wrote a book called Angel. I read the whole book, so it's a pretty good listen if you like the sound of my voice. My mom does. But the book is really everything I've learned and the candidness that I'm trying to share with you on stage here. It's literally all those lessons of making huge mistakes while also, basically being one of the top 4 angel investors of all time, just statistically. It's just numbers. It's not bragging. And so Chris Sacca and Ron Conway would be the ones ahead of us, and maybe Mitch Kapoor too, and Freda. So we're going to do 50 deals this year. We have 2,900 members, and I've been going around the world. I was just in Hong Kong last week, Sydney, Tokyo, and we teach a course called Angel University. We're teaching people how to do angel investing. We have 2,900 members. We're going to try to get to 10,000. We'll do 50 deals this year, and we'll try to hit 100 next year. And I was able to get the domain name thesyndicate.com, and we're going to take this kind of duct tape together process, and we're going to make it into a community that you're all welcome to join if you're accredited investors. And if you're not accredited investors, we'll take your email, and there's 2 things that are going to change. One of them is already sort of changed, which is sites like Seed Invest and Republic, which I think are the 2 best ones that have the best deal flow. We've done deals with them, and consumers are going to, retail investors are going to start dipping into this, and that's what I think the ICO fraud, the silver lining of that entire fraud was that it showed that there's a global desire to take risk and put in small amounts of money. It also pulled out all the grifters in the world. I mean, wow, spectacular. You can view this deck at that URL. I'm Jason Calacanis. I'm Jason on Twitter. I'm Jason on Instagram. I'm jason.tumblr.com. I don't have jason.com, but go to thesyndicate.com and sign up, and I'll be here for the next 2 days if you have any questions. I highly encourage y'all to start your own syndicate. It's very easy to do. Talk to your attorney. It costs about $10,000 to $15,000 a year to $10,000 to $15,000 a year to manage one for 10 years. But if you have 20 friends or 30 friends, this is a great way to increase the amount of money you invest. Oh, and the thing that's going to change, I almost forgot. So you have the 99 to 250 level. That was a major change. Then you have this equity crowdfunding. That's going to be a slow burn, but that's changing. And the definition of an accredited investor is going to change. So the SEC has been charged with, and it takes them usually a couple of years to execute on these things, maybe allowing people who are a professor who teaches economics to be accredited even if she makes under $200,000 a year. So that's the craziness. Like, Americans are allowed to go to Vegas and put all their money on black or red, but they can't invest in a startup. And that's the real tragedy in this. I think the big opportunity, and I'll close with this, is if you just think about all those Uber drivers, they knew that was going to be a world-changing startup. If you were in HR and you used LinkedIn in the first year or two, you knew that that was going to change the world. If you were an Airbnb host, you also knew that was going to change the world. Consumers are incredibly intelligent. Executives are incredibly intelligent. And it's not their net worth that makes them smart. It's their use of these tools and the work they do every day. If you had gone to the Airbnb hosts and the Uber hosts and said, would you like us to take 10% of your earnings and put it towards Uber shares or Airbnb shares, you know what they would have said? Would you take 50? They knew, but they were not allowed to participate. And with all this talk of socialism and all the divided views a lot of us have over capitalism and is it out of control, here's an easy way to democratize it. Allow those drivers, allow those hosts, allow those HR people, headhunters who know that this company, this opportunity is there. Give them the ability to move from poor to middle class, from middle class to upper middle class, wealthy, ultra wealthy, putting aside how we all feel about those categories. It's really a rigged system for the rich. And coming from a middle class family, my dad a bartender, my mom a nurse, I feel very lucky that I've been able to get to this point in my career, and I want to pass it on. And the way to pass it on is to allow more people to participate in these game-changing companies. I'm Jason Calacanis. You can reach me at jason@calacanis.com.